Josiah says on my warm season lawns, I'm low on phosphorus and potassium following bad advice. I would like to know what you mean by low on P and K. We're going to get into soil tests. I mean, this is definitely something I'm not going to skip over. I'm not going to go over lightly either. I'll just say it here. I'll say it as many times as I have to say it. Is that soil test numbers don't really mean that much to me as a soil scientist who studies soil tests on turfgrass science. Okay. They don't really mean that much to me just in and of themselves. There's not a lot of correlation with many of those numbers. There's even fewer calibrations with many of those numbers. Okay. What I want to know is what your turfgrass looks like, So what's low, there's been documented cases of phosphorus being adequate at like 8 parts per million, 9 parts per million, 10 parts per million. Those are adequate levels. Okay. There's been cases of grow-in situations where 30 parts per million wasn't enough. It was not enough to sustain the turfgrass, expected results on grow-ins at 30 parts per million omega-3. But I mean, there's been cases where 20 is enough. 30 is not enough. I mean, there's just not a lot of, I don't have a lot of confidence, I should say. And in reality, the strange thing is that phosphorus has been studied the most, and there's just not a lot there. I mean, it's probably the number's probably somewhere between 10 and 20 in most cases, but I just don't have a lot of confidence in it. And more importantly than the number and my confidence in the number is people turning their eye away from the turf, the epistemological approach. I mean, how do you know? Well, I know because the soil test number says it's low. No, that's not why you know. Okay, stop thinking that way. Look at the turf first. The turf has to be the primary factor. If the number, let me ask you this: and I've said this before on a podcast, and I mentioned this to my scientific buddies, my colleagues in academia before, and they kind of think I'm crazy. If the phosphorus number on a soil test was 0, but your turf looked fine, would you apply phosphorus? And people will say, yes, I would apply phosphorus if the phosphorus says 0. Even if the turf was perfectly acceptable, I'd still apply phosphorus if the phosphorus was 0. If the phosphorus is 0 on a soil test and your turf is fine, then the test is wrong. The test is wrong. And I think people have this idea that the test in soils is as reliable and dependable as a medical test. It's not. It's not that reliable. It's very unreliable in many cases. So I just don't put a lot of confidence in soil testing. I do use soil tests when I'm trying to diagnose turf grass problems. If the turf is unacceptable, then I will use a soil test to kind of help guide me a little bit. But I'm using it as a guide to diagnose issues. I'm not using it as a guide to recommend fertilizer applications in most cases. Matt says he did Milorganite applications for several years. Like I said, I mean, there's nothing. Every fertilizer product out there has a value. I can make turfgrass look great with virtually any nitrogen source, and so can you. I'm sure you're very familiar with that. The question is, at what economic and environmental cost? We want to have as little economic cost and little cost as possible to produce the product we're looking for. We can do that with a variety of different nitrogen sources. When they're blended or when they're homogenized like Milorganite is, where you have phosphorus in it, you have to consider the environmental cost. You're inflating the phosphorus levels so high that it is at least increasing the potential environmental risk. And I just don't think we can do that forever. It started, they've been banning phosphorus all over the states, and it's pretty clear there's a very strong relationship between locations that have banned phosphorus and a corresponding reduction in the application of that phosphorus. And, it's unfortunate that the government's got to step in to do these things sometimes, but if we just keep going along being ignorant and throwing her down all the time, eventually they're going to step in. It's just inevitable. Eventually they're going to step in and they're going to say, nope, you can't do this anymore. And then there's one more restriction on us. Meanwhile, if you just do it voluntarily, you'll save money. The turfgrass probably isn't going to change. Turfgrass is probably going to look the same as it ever was, unless there's a phosphorus deficiency. If there is a phosphorus deficiency, then sure, Milorganite and natural organics have a place. If there's not a phosphorus deficiency and the natural organic has a phosphorus in it, I want someone to email me some or call me and show me some evidence where there is a good reason to apply natural organic product, fertilizer that contains phosphorus to a turf grass that is not phosphorus deficient. I can't think of any good reason why you would need to do that. So ergo, there's no good reason to apply any natural organic product that contains phosphorus at all unless the turf grass is deficient in phosphorus. There's no good reason. You can provide the nutritional needs of the plant in other ways that are less expensive and avoid the phosphorus inclusion and avoid that potential environmental risk.